I spent 40 years sitting high on a bench, wearing black robes. I believed that order and strict discipline were the highest forms of love. But I ruled my own house like a courtroom, without any mercy. Now the verdict is in, and I am serving a life sentence alone.
I sit here surrounded by mahogany and leather, breathing in the scent of old paper and dust. To the outside world, this library is a monument to a distinguished career. They see the gold leaf spines of the law books, the framed degrees, and the heavy gavel that rests on my desk like a dormant weapon. But to me, this room is not a sanctuary. It is an evidence locker of a life misspent. I spent a lifetime interpreting the law, dissecting statutes, and ensuring that justice was blind. The tragedy is that I brought that blindness home with me. I walked through my front door every evening, but I never really took off the robe. In my 30s and 40s, I was consumed by a very specific, rigid idea of what it meant to be a man and a father. I subscribed to the old school of masculinity, the stoic, unshakable pillar. I believed that my primary duty was to prepare my sons for a harsh, unforgiving world. I told myself that the world would not care about their feelings, so neither should I. I thought I was armoring them, adding layers of steel to their characters. I didn't realize that in the process, I was suffocating the soft, human parts of them that needed to breathe. My home was run with the precision of a high court. Dinner was not a time for laughter or messy stories. It was a deposition. If one of my boys spilled his milk, I didn't see a small accident. I saw a lack of discipline. If they came home with a grade lower than an A, I didn't ask if they were struggling. I cross-examined them about their study habits. I treated their childhood errors as inadmissible evidence of character flaws. I remember the silence at the dinner table, a heavy, suffocating silence that I mistook for respect. I looked at their straightened backs and their quiet, "Yes, sirs," and I patted myself on the back. I thought I was raising kings. I didn't see that I was actually raising prisoners who were just waiting for their parole date so they could escape the warden. The memories that haunt me most now are not the big arguments, but the quiet moments where I had the chance to be a father and chose to be a judge instead. There is one memory that plays on a loop in my mind, distinct and sharp, like a photograph developed in acid. My youngest son, Thomas, was 10 years old. He was a gentle boy, artistic and sensitive, traits that I, in my arrogance, viewed as liabilities that needed to be corrected. He had found a stray dog, a scruffy, shivering thing with a limp. He brought it into the mudroom, wrapping it in one of my expensive wool blankets. When I came home and found them, Thomas looked up at me with eyes full of tears and hope. He wasn't asking for permission. He was asking for shared humanity. He wanted me to look at the suffering creature and feel what he felt. But I didn't look at the dog. I looked at the mud on the floor. I looked at the wool blanket ruined by dirt. I didn't yell. I never yelled. Yelling implies a loss of control, and I was always in control. Instead, I used that calm, terrifying judicial voice. I lectured him on responsibility, on property value, on the chaotic nature of bringing a wild animal into a civilized home. I made him take the dog to the shelter himself. I thought I was teaching him a lesson about the real world, that you can't save everyone, that rules exist for a reason. I watched him walk down the driveway, his small shoulders shaking with sobs he was trying to suppress because he knew I detested crying. I crushed his empathy because I mistook it for weakness. I didn't just reject the dog. I rejected the core of who he was. I validated his fear that his father loved order more than he loved his own son. That was the day the light went out of his eyes when he looked at me. He stopped bringing me his discoveries. He stopped bringing me his pain. He learned that the docket was closed. The rupture didn't happen with an explosion. It happened with a slow, agonizing erosion. As the boys grew into men, the distance became a chasm. I had always assumed that once they were adults, they would understand. I told myself, one day they will thank me. One day they will realize that I made them strong. I waited for that day. I am still waiting. The irony is that I was so successful in teaching them to be independent, stoic, and self-reliant that they no longer needed me. I had designed myself out of their lives. By the time they left for college, the house was silent. But it wasn't the peaceful silence of a library. It was the hollow silence of a tomb. My wife, who had spent decades trying to mediate, trying to soften my sentences, eventually retreated as well. We entered what I now call the roommate phase. She stayed, perhaps out of duty or habit, but she stopped sharing her heart with me. She had seen how I treated the children, and she learned to protect herself from my judgment too. We moved through the house like two ghosts, polite and distant. I also began to lose my friends. I had surrounded myself with other men of status, lawyers, doctors, captains of industry. We formed friendships based on intellectual debate and professional standing. But when you spend your life judging others, analyzing their flaws, and proving your intellectual superiority, you don't build bonds. You build walls. When I retired, when the robes came off and the power faded, those phone calls stopped. They weren't my friends, they were my associates. Without the courtroom, I had no platform, and without a platform, I had no audience. I realized too late that I had won every argument I ever had with my family and friends, but the prize for winning was total isolation. I was the undefeated champion of an empty arena. Retirement came with a gold watch and a banquet that felt more like a funeral. I remember standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Young associates hungry for my spot, old colleagues eyeing the exit, and realizing I didn't truly know a single soul in the room. They applauded my rulings, my conviction rates, my unwavering interpretation of the statutes. But not one person there knew my favorite color, or what I feared most in the middle of the night. When I walked out of the courthouse for the last time, I thought I was walking into freedom. I was wrong. I was walking into a prison of my own design, a solitary confinement where the warden is my own memory. Now, my days are defined by a terrifying, unstructured emptiness. I sit here in this library, and the silence is different now. It is no longer the dignified silence of study. It is the screaming silence of absence. I look at these leather-bound books, thousands of pages of rules and precedents, and I realize they cannot talk back to me. They cannot ask me how my day was. They cannot hold my hand when the arthritis flares up in the winter. I have accumulated wealth, yes. The house is paid for, the pension is generous. I have the financial security I used to tell my sons was the most important thing in life. But I have learned the hard way that you cannot hug a bank account. You cannot have a conversation with a stock portfolio. I often find myself waiting for the phone to ring, even though I know it won't. When it does ring, it's a solicitor or a wrong number. My sons are dutiful. They send cards on Christmas and my birthday. The cards are polite, generic, and signed with a scribble. There are no handwritten notes, no photos of my grandchildren tucked inside. They fulfill their obligation to me exactly as I taught them. I taught them to follow the rules, to do what is required, and nothing more. They are treating me exactly how I treated them, with formal, detached correctness. I am a statute to them, an old law that hasn't been repealed yet, but is largely ignored. I wanted respect. I got it. But I traded love to get it. And God, the exchange rate was terrible. In these long, quiet evenings, as the shadows lengthen across the floorboards, I have finally overturned the verdict of my own life. I used to believe that strength was an oak tree, rigid, unbending, standing tall against the storm until it snaps. I despised the willow for bending with the wind. I was a fool. I see now that true strength is not in how rigid you can be, but in how much you can endure, how much you can forgive, and how much you can yield without breaking. I spent my life worshiping the letter of the law, but I completely missed the spirit of it. The law is necessary for society, yes, but it is poison for a family. A home does not need a judge, it needs a gardener. I look at the gavel on my desk, my symbol of power. It looks like a toy to me now. A heavy, useless wooden hammer. It was a tool for ending conversations, for silencing dissent, for declaring a winner and a loser. But in a family, if one person wins, everyone loses. When I silenced my sons, I didn't win an argument. I lost their trust. When I corrected my wife, I didn't gain clarity. I lost her intimacy. I treated life as a series of problems to be solved, cases to be closed. But people are not problems to be solved. They are mysteries to be witnessed. I am 82 years old. My time is running out. The docket is almost clear. I cannot file an appeal on the past 40 years. The statute of limitations on my parenting mistakes ran out a long time ago. I cannot go back and hug that 10-year-old boy with the stray dog. I cannot go back and tell the teenager with the bad grades that I love him regardless of his report card. That pain is permanent. It is the penance I must pay. But I have realized that while I cannot change the evidence, I can change the closing argument. I can admit that I was wrong. The hardest sentence a judge can ever speak is not guilty or not guilty. It is, I am sorry. And I am finally learning to say it, even if there is no one here to hear it but the ghosts in this room. I share this confession not to ask for your pity. I do not deserve it, but to offer you a warning from the end of the line. You may be sitting there right now, building your career, building your reputation. You may be a father who thinks he is doing the right thing by being tough. You may be a husband who thinks being right is more important than being kind. I was you. I had the logic, I had the rationale, and I had the conviction. But I was sleepwalking toward a cliff. Do not confuse authority with connection. Do not confuse fear with respect. You can build a fortress so strong that no one can hurt you, but you will find that you have locked yourself in and everyone else out. If you still have people in your life who look up to you, put down the gavel today, right now. When your child comes to you with a mistake, do not cross-examine them. Hold them. When your spouse tells you how they feel, do not listen to find the logical flaw in their argument. Listen to hear the beating of their heart. Stop trying to win. In the court of love, the only way to win is to surrender. Be soft. Be forgiving. Allow yourself to be wrong. It takes a terrifying amount of courage to be gentle in a hard world, but it is the only legacy that matters. Don't wait until you are surrounded by silent books to realize that the only story worth reading was written in the eyes of the people you pushed away.
I spent a lifetime judging others by the strict letter of the law. But in the end, I judged my own children without any mercy. Now I understand that being right is the loneliest place in the world. Don't let your legacy be a gavel that hangs in an empty room.